Good evening, everybody. Once again, just so we kind of know what we're doing here, um, because of the way we're sending out the ballots with our mandatory mail-in election we're having this cycle, we figured out that we're not going to have any meeting, no way possible for any of our candidates to actually speak to any general public really until after the election. So we put together the Zoom meeting list for everybody, and like Scott said, it'll live time right now, and then he'll repurpose it, post it on the Facebook and Snapchat and everything else, and we'll go from there and see how it goes. It's kind of interesting because it feels like we're actually going to visit with more people than we normally do, but that's good. As I said earlier, we're kind of when we get to the questions part of it. This isn't big secrets or anything. I emailed the questions to everybody, all the candidates ahead of time, just so they kind of think about what they're going to say and how they're going to phrase themselves. This isn't, some big fancy politicians have been training to do this 40 years. They can rattle off an hour and a half speech on anything. You know what I mean? We're all amateurs of what we're doing here, so we're kind of go through that. Next up is Joe Cacioppo. Is that how you say it correctly?
Cacioppo.
Say it again.
Cacioppo.
Cacioppo. Okay, I'm from Pennsylvania, so I can barely speak correctly.
That's okay. My relatives in New York would say Cacioppo, so
Cacioppo.
We're close enough.
Joe does not have a web page, but he does have he is on Facebook. Re-elect Joe Cacioppo. And if you get a chance, please take a look at that. And I'll now let him go ahead and introduce himself and before we get to the questions.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. I appreciate this. I appreciate the opportunity to be invited and take part of this. It is an odd time we're in right now, and we're all adjusting to what we're calling the new normal. Hopefully it'll be short-lived, but it is what it is. A little bit about me. I've been in Carson City for 25 years. My wife and I raised 3 children here. All of them went through the Carson City School District from kindergarten through 12th grade. One went off to school at Boise State. One went to Arizona State, but she's transferring to UNR. And my middle one just graduated from UNR. So we're local for the last 25 years. I was born in New York, lived there until I was in grade school, moved to Los Angeles, and slowly worked my way here to Nevada. I'm a veteran of the U.S. Army, served 4 years in the infantry, active duty, and then I went to college in California, did my remaining 4 years in the reserves, and got my first job in California because that's where I went to high school. And then once my wife and I got married and we started a family, I was familiar with Carson City and looked for an opportunity to come up here and was fortunate enough to get that opportunity and have been here ever since. I'm a civil engineer by education and trade. I'm a part owner in a firm called Resource Concepts. We do a variety of different kinds of work. I won't get into that since that's not what we're here for. But how I got started in being interested in the school district was working for them as a consultant. I was part of the 2000, 2002, and subsequent bond projects where we worked on all the schools at least once. Probably the most notable ones were Carson Middle School because it took a lot of work, Carson High School where we redid the football and now what we call the multi-purpose field, refurbished the tennis courts, the baseball area, and did a variety of other work. Anyway, in doing all that work, I got to meet a lot of the families and the school district personnel and just really gained an appreciation for what the schools do. And having 3 kids in the district, I thought, I've got a vested interest in the schools, and the opportunity presented itself to run for school board. So in 2012, I did and got elected, and I've now served almost 2 full terms. And I'm running for my 3rd and what will be my final term because we do have term limits and we term out after 3. So I'm very hopeful and very excited to be elected for my 3rd term. I think I've learned a lot being on the school board, not just about our district, but other districts in the state and in the country. And I think I have a lot to offer in terms of continuing to prove the educational system for the students and do it in a way that works for the teachers, staff, and the community as a whole. We've spent a lot of time working with our community partners, developing new community partners. One of our biggest partners is Carson City. We hold 2 meetings a year with the supervisors and the mayor, where we get a chance to sit down face to face and talk about some of the stuff we're doing, some of the support we need and we appreciate, and just do what we can to create a transparent and cooperative partnership. Again, all in the interest of the students. I've done a lot of volunteering in town over the years. I've been AYSO coach for, I've lost count, 12 years. Coached in the Capital Soccer League, chaperoned kids to go skiing up at Diamond Peak, helped Pete Sennett with the Carson High School cross-country team. I'm a runner. In my free time, I like to do the long, crazy endurance runs, although admittedly they're getting shorter as I get older. But just trying to help the kids be the best they can be. And doing all those things got me interested in running for the school board. And here I am 8 years later, asking for everybody's vote one more time.
I'll go ahead and start the questions. There's 3 or 4 questions I have. We'll see as time goes. Hopefully you'll have some thoughts on all of them. What kind of new ideas do you have that could improve the quality of education here in Nevada, specifically Carson City?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Jokingly, getting away from the COVID-19 distancing would be the newest idea. But, there's a lot of things we do. Probably the thing I preach the most is increasing the teaching time that the teachers have with students within the existing teaching day. I'm not promoting increasing the day. We have a roughly, depending on what grade level you're at, 6.5 hour day to teach these kids. But in that day, the teachers are not only teaching, they're entering and assessing data, they're performing student evaluations, they're performing self-evaluations that are required by themselves to get ready for their own evaluations that I know we'll talk about later. And then the data they're entering, in many instances, they're entering it in multiple locations. So if you look at the course of the average school day, we're struggling to make sure 70% of that day is spent teaching. And I think if you want to improve education, it's an old idea, but the new idea would be increase the amount of time you have in the classroom. The other things I'd recommend is providing greater classroom support. We have a lot of support in the district through coaches and specialists and whatnot, but a lot of that is more at the district level and at the school level, and that winds up, as much as it helps, it also creates, unfortunately, obstacles for the teachers because they've got a lot of people dictating what they need to do and how they need to do it. And I'd like to see a more collaborative effort in the classroom to give these teachers the help they need. They're teaching kids that come from a lot of backgrounds, and sometimes there's challenges. And when you're in a classroom, say in a kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade level, and you have kids with a variety of issues from learning to disciplinary, the more help we can get these teachers in the classroom, I think the better the delivery system for the students is going to be. Some of the things that we're doing that aren't new, but they're new to us, is implementing new curriculum. We went a long period of time without, in some cases, having curriculum, math being one example. And we've, over the last few years, spent a fair amount of money adopting new curriculum that is both textbook and online to give these kids the best education we can give them. One of the newer things at the higher level that I'd like to see us improve on or expand on is what we call the Jumpstart program. It's a dual credit program for students. They can start in their junior year, and if they stay the course, they can actually obtain their associate's degree simultaneous with their high school education. My son, who is my oldest, took advantage of the AP program, which served him well. My middle one took the regular route, if you will, and then my youngest did the Jumpstart. And in June, when she walked across the stage, she also had her associate's degree. So she started college as a junior, And she'll still have a total of 5 semesters to complete, but that beats having to start from scratch. So I'd like to see that Jumpstart program gain momentum and in the next year or two double in size. So there's some of the ideas I have that we can improve the quality of education.
Do you believe we have a good balance of academic achievement versus social welfare in our school systems? I mean, my example would be, I've been getting multiple phone calls from Dr. Stokes about, school closure and everything like that. But it feels like a lot of it is concerned about feeding the kids. Lunches are available, please feed the kids. I mean, what is the school's job? Is it to feed the kids or is it to teach the kids?
Well, and that's a good point. The job is to educate the kids, but some of these kids come to school and the meal they get in school, for some of them, is the only meal they eat all day. And I know that sounds, a lot of people have a hard time believing it, but that's the fact for some of these kids. So it's that balance of, if the kids are coming to school and they have a variety of personal issues and they're hungry, if not starving, their main focus really isn't on education. And so the idea behind feeding the kids is, making sure that we're taking care of these kids in a number of ways so that when they're in school, they can focus on their education. But to answer the question, do we have a good balance? I think we do, but there's always room for improvement. We have, when we talk about social welfare, we have a grant that affords us 6 social workers that helps us out in the schools. So some of these kids that need a little extra help or guidance outside the classroom, we now have social workers that can provide that. Whereas without it, we no longer really have counselors in the old sense of the word. So the teachers wind up being the educator, the counselor, the social workers, and as you mentioned, the food source. And so, that's helping us out quite a bit. We also have the police and the schools, which is a joint funded venture with the city, where we flip 50% of the bill and they fund the other half. And it not only provides safety for the kids, but it gives these kids kind of a social outlet where if they're having trouble with other students or other issues that are just more than they can handle, they have somebody to talk to. And these police officers have become not just cops in the sense of the word, but they've become a trusted source that these kids could go to. So it's kind of made them real and taught the kids that these are people that are there to help them. We've got the teachers and paraprofessionals who back in the old days, we called the paraprofessionals teachers' aides, but these are really instrumental people that help the teachers to balance the learning that goes on in the classroom. So while the teacher is teaching some of the curriculum, the paraprofessionals spend their time helping reinforce the lessons, but also responding to some of the issues that get away from teaching. Again, these social welfare issues to help these kids get back on task. Where also the teachers are spending a lot of time understanding some of the situations that the families are in and communicating with the parents and the students so that they can better understand how to structure the learning day. And all this sounds like, for some people, it really sounds like a lot of soft education, if you will. But the end result is trying to obtain that balance that promotes academic achievement for these kids. And we're really seeing that it's working. If you look at our high school graduation rates, Carson High School has a very high graduation rate. It's the highest, if not among the highest in the state, and rivals many other states. We're in the high 90 percentile. Pioneer High School, which typically has struggled because they sometimes have a different set of kids, their graduation rates have climbed too, well into the 70s, and I think maybe even higher recently. And so combined, we're seeing high graduation rates, we're seeing high ACT scores, we're seeing high SBAC scores, which is kind of a consortium test that we've bought into as a state. And combined, I think, we have a good balance of academic achievement combined with the social welfare of the students.
Do you support pay for performance based on students' progress during the school year?
So, to answer that, the honest answer is yes and no. In theory, I totally support it. I work in the private sector, and we base pay by performance. The schools are a little different. So in answer to the question specifically related to schools, unfortunately, I have to say more no than yes. And the reason I say that is, while I think pay for performance makes a lot of sense, if you're going to do that, to be fair to the teachers, you have to provide an environment that they're in control of. They certainly are in control of their classroom. They're seen as the teacher. But what's mandated from above, be it the district, the state, or the federal level, is requiring these teachers to teach certain items in a certain format and in a certain pattern. So they're not really in control of what, when, and how they teach a lot of this stuff. They are, they're certainly held accountable, but you may have a teacher that, hey, my classroom is really struggling in the English side, and I'd like to spend more of my day doing that, but it's mandated that I spend X amount of time teaching English language, a certain amount of time teaching math, a certain amount of time teaching social studies. And, while they have some latitude to alter that a little bit, they really have to follow a script, because they're working with other teachers. And in years past, if you kind of think about it as a pendulum, the pendulum was really leaning one way, where every classroom was an island. The teachers taught how they felt they needed to teach, and some good came out of that, some bad came out of that. Some classrooms really excelled, other classrooms really fell behind. So then we kind of threw the pendulum the entire other way, where now we've dictated, this is what you need to teach, this is when you need to teach it, this is how you need to teach it. And I think the solution is to kind of pull that pendulum back to the middle and provide some basic guidelines, but allow these teachers to be the professionals they are. So I don't think it's fair to rate their pay 100% based on performance. I think it should be a percentage of it, but I think it really can't be too high of a percentage, because I think you're basically asking these teachers to run a relay race, but at the same time, we're tying their legs together.
Are you satisfied with the priorities of our school district at Carson City? And do you have any feelings on the school district budget process?
So I do. Sorry, I wrote some notes because I know I get a little bit nervous. But am I satisfied with the priorities of the school district? I think there's room for improvement, but I am satisfied. And the reason I say I'm satisfied is we developed about, oh gosh, it was back in 16, 17, but we worked on it for a solid year, a strategic plan that isn't your basic feel-good strategic plan that a lot of corporations develop. It really was a hands-on strategic plan that we developed not just as a district, but as a community. We invited as many community members who wanted to be involved to participate in it. And what we did is we created something called Empower Carson City. Now we've modified it once, and we call it Empower Carson City 2022 to take us that far. But it's basically a 5-pillar approach to education. We're focusing on exceptional administrators, teachers, and staff, healthy generations of students, community and full partnership. I talked a little bit about that with the partnership we have with the city and a variety of the professionals in our community. Really working on engaging parents and families in what we do, and developing a curriculum that matters. And by that, I mean, we have a curriculum in place that we've improved over the years. We've adopted, we've abandoned in some cases, and brought on new curriculum. And we created a system, really a set of marching orders that we can hold ourselves accountable to. We can hold our superintendent accountable to. And it's a set of guidelines that allow the teachers to stay on task. So I am satisfied with the priorities in that regard. I think we're doing a decent job of emphasizing academic rigor, making the classes 21st century level classes, making them challenging so we're competitive with other states, and really placing an emphasis on college and career readiness, which I think are all important. But what I'd like to see is I'd like to see some continued academic growth. I'd certainly like to see us improve our state standing in the nation. As everybody knows, we're Nevada is generally ranked near last. I think that's an unfair ranking because it takes into account more than academic achievement. It takes into account the society we live in, our demographics, and a variety of other things that we couldn't possibly control in the district. I'd like to see realistic state funding levels so that we can receive the funding we need to do what's expected of us. We have a lot of unfunded mandates. Read by the third grade is one of them. What we need to achieve for special education is another. We wind up seeking grant funding, to help us out with that. And then I'd like to see more emphasis, again, placed on the Jumpstart program at the high school level, because I think there's a lot of room for that to increase, while at the same time allowing the AP program to do well and increase in itself. And then you asked, do I have any feelings on the school district's budget process? I have a lot of feelings about that. We have roughly a $60 million budget that in one aspect sounds like a lot of money. It breaks down to a little over $7,000 per student. And with that money, we have to feed the students, we have to educate the students, we have to buy new curriculum, pay salaries, just source a lot of items that are all involved in educating these students. Right now, the current formula that we use to fund education in Nevada is very outdated. It was developed in the 60s. There's been some tweaks to it over the years, but it's a very old and convoluted system that even the CPAs and whatnot really struggle to understand. Oh, I'm sorry, not the CPAs, but the CFAs, the financial folks. There's a new program in development in the state, but it needs a lot of work. And right now, I'll be honest with you, it is hammering 15 of the 17 districts. The only districts benefiting right now from this new funding program are Clark and Washoe. And it's no surprise that those school districts are larger than all of us, and they may have a little more representation in how this gets developed. But all 15 of the other districts, and there's 17 in the state, are really suffering. We're going to see we're anticipating a $2.3 million deficit that we're trying to account for, and not wanting to operate in deficit spending. We're trying to figure out what we're going to do to offset that. And unfortunately, there's been talk about the paraprofessionals and having to limit the amount of those that we employ, and cutting not so much programs, but how we deliver the programs to try to get us to a more balanced budget. And then now with this COVID-19, the casinos have closed their doors, and a lot of our state funding comes from casino revenue. And the governor told us to already start planning for another 6 to 14% cut. And so when you look at, how do you take a $60 million budget and cut, round numbers, 15 to 18 million out of it, when we're already searching for grant funding sources to help us out? I mean, there's always ways that we can be more efficient and improve what we do, but the reality is we run pretty lean. We have very low overhead cost. And we really get pretty creative in how we run these programs. And when I say we, I really don't want to take credit as a school board. Our staff, our teachers, our board folks, our district folks are really an intelligent, well-minded group of people that are working really hard to provide a quality education for these kids. We had a Las Vegas lawmaker in a public session say what's good for Las Vegas is good for the rest of the state. And what we're seeing is, that's a bunch of nonsense. Every district has different challenges, and I really think all the districts need to be funded in a way that's fair, to all the districts and what they're being expected to do. So I do have pretty strong feelings about the school district budget. I think there's things we can do internally within our district that we're trying to do now to improve what we do. But I really think if we're going to get state and federal mandates, I think those need to be well thought out in how they're going to be funded. And in a climate like this, it's a real challenge, and I think we're not being served well right now.
Okay, Joe, there's a couple of questions on the chat. Go ahead, Scott.
One tied directly to dollars and cents. Several years ago, the district put in a laundromat and a medical clinic. With short funds, is it time to consider shutting these down?
So I think they're referring to the clinic we have at the old Gleason site. And to answer the question, I would say no. I'd really hate to see something like that close down because that provides a great service. We have a lot of kids in the district that are below the poverty level, in some cases substantially below. We have what we call students in transition, which is a clever way to talk about homeless families and students that are between homes. In some cases, they still have a pretty safe environment. They might be living with a grandparent or something, but their lives have been disrupted. They're struggling with health care. They're not, but their parents are struggling to afford it. And in some cases, this is the only viable way for some of these students to seek ongoing and constant checkups and healthcare opportunities. So, there is a cost to it. It isn't a high cost. And I really don't think it's an area we want to cut. We don't have any plans to cut it. And I really think ethically we shouldn't cut that unless we were just in such dire straits that we just couldn't afford that. I think we have a responsibility to these kids. And if they're not fed, if they're not healthy, they're coming from challenging backgrounds, really how much can you expect of these poor kids?
Another question, students have moved to remote learning from home during the COVID-19 crisis. Once this is over, do you foresee more remote learning and homeschooling taking place?
From the district's perspective, I hope not. I think for some families, remote learning works for them. An example is some of the programs we offer at Pioneer High School. Pioneer is, in simplest terms, an alternative high school that offers a variety of educational opportunities for students. It used to be thought of as a place for the troubled teens, if you will. It's into a lot more than that. We certainly try to help everybody there. They do distance learning there, online learning and things like that. And it works well for some students. But as a district, I would like to see the forced remote learning absolutely go away and get these kids back into brick and mortar buildings where they can be with teachers and get the education they need. And in some situations, parents are well equipped to educate these kids, but in most cases, it's asking a lot from these parents. When we get out of COVID-19 and everything releases, I don't see us going right back to normal. I think as a society, restaurants are still going to struggle. Small businesses, if they're still going to be around, are still going to struggle. And as a school district, we have the responsibility and the ability to bring these kids in, give them the transportation they need to get to school, give them the books and the computers they need, and really educate these kids the way they need to be educated. It's a challenging world. School, even at the kindergarten level, is so much more challenging than it was when I was in kindergarten. My daughter will laugh 1,000 years ago. And, provide an education where these kids can be competitive. So I think remote learning is going to continue, but from the district's perspective, we'd like to get as many kids inside the buildings as we can, not just because we want to exist, but we think that's really the best place for these kids to receive a quality education.
Okay. Paul, any more on your end?
No, there's a couple more in the chat. Is there? You want me to read them, or are you going to read them?
Go ahead.
Should the city work with, you can see me looking at the computer.
Okay,
Should the city work with the Carson City School District to plan for future growth?
Absolutely. I think when we talk about future growth, that has an impact on the school district. Some will argue are kind of an older community, but not so much anymore. When we moved to this area 25 years ago, the cul-de-sac we live on, we were the youngest people by far. Now, 25 years later, we're some of the older people on the cul-de-sac. But we have a lot of new people, new families that moved in, not just in our neighborhood, but throughout the district, that are young. They have school-age children. And when we're talking about, how Carson City is going to grow and how we're going to bring people here, that has an impact on the school district, and the school and the city needs to work together to talk about how we're going to provide a successful community and a successful school district to meet the needs of the new families coming into the community. So I really appreciate the relationship we have with the school, with the city. I really appreciate the meetings we have with them and the behind the scenes work we do with them. And I see us being partners long after I'm gone. I hope that continues forever. I think it's really a responsible and respectful relationship that needs to continue.
Next question is, tell me your top priority to fund with deceased revenues. What program or services is your top priority?
So can you read part of that one more time? I want to make sure I understood that. Deceased revenues
Decreased.
no longer have anymore, or decreased?
Decreased, sorry, I
Okay.
can't see it.
No, that's okay, thank you. So when push comes to shove, there's certainly things we could take a hard look at and cut out of what we do. It could be as extreme as stopping transportation, no longer providing transportation. We don't want to do that. We don't have any plans to do that. We could increase class sizes. Again, it's something we don't want to do, but we anticipate having to do. We could look at, what we are looking at is, unfortunately, reducing some of the in-class personnel. It's not something I'm in favor of, but reducing the amount of paraprofessionals is something that is on the agenda and something we're looking at as a cost savings measure. We also have coaches and specialists that provide a very valuable service, but if we had to, we'd have to look at reducing those. If some of you remember in years past, we had to make the hard decision to get rid of the counselors. And that was something a lot of us, myself included, didn't want to do, but we had more expenses than we had money. So we had to look at how we did things, and that was one of the cuts we made. And I think what we found is that really hurt the classroom. It hurt the teachers. The teachers became not only the teachers, but they became the counselors and other things. They became the test administrators, not just for their classroom tests, but for the standardized tests. And so we are going to have to get creative with how we fund things with decreased funds. We're going to have to look at more grant funding, which in some aspects works well for us, but all grants sunset eventually. So we have to be responsible in what grants we look for and what they're doing for us. But these are things we're looking at right now in terms of how we're going to deliver this system. But I think probably the more prevalent areas you look at, unfortunately, are decreased staff, because like most organizations, approximately 80% of our revenue goes towards salaries and those kinds of things. So you can't not look in that direction, but it's a hard direction to look. We're looking at some of our older staff who now are reaching retirement age, and while we're not asking anybody to retire, some are electing to do so because, one, this COVID-19 situation we're in kind of creates a pathway for them to say maybe enough's enough. And at the same time, when people retire, they usually are leaving at the higher end of the salary spectrum. So in turn, when we bring people on, a lot of times we're hiring people who are just graduating from college. They're coming in at the lower end. So we're saving money in that respect. And so it really is a challenge. And I know I'm kind of all over the place with where we go with this, but it really is the most challenging thing I think we do as a school board, working with our superintendent, is to, how do we deal with this decreased funding? Because anything we do is going to have an impact. And I'm a business owner in the community. The last thing I want to do is take away somebody's livelihood. And so it's a really delicate balance. But in the end, we have to educate these students in the best way we can. And that's really how we're looking to handle this decreased funding. We're looking at through the lens of how do we still provide a quality education for these students.
Dan, you have your hand up. Dan, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I'm an old guy, and when I was a kid, we were doing the dive under the desk and air raid drills and all that kind of stuff. There was no lunch provided for kids. It was paid for by their parents. And if you didn't pay for it, you brown bagged it to work, to school.
Right.
And, the schools seem to be taking on more and more and more responsibility over the kids, which should be taken care of by their parents. Common Core, for example, and other big government programs that should be, delegated to the states. And also, we got these bilingual programs for illegals and all that kind of nonsense. So why shouldn't the schools cut that stuff out and get back to basic education?
Well, I completely understand where you're coming from, Dan. And in some aspects, I don't disagree with you. I think it's an entirely different educational system now than it was when I was a kid and when it was when you were a kid. And the simple answer is we can't just, even if we wanted to, and I'm not saying we do, because I would not want to discriminate against any of the bilingual students or any of those.
Hold it. You are for illegal aliens in the schools.
No,
No, I'm not.
he didn't say that.
But when I say bilingual, we have plenty of American citizens that are bilingual. And I think the issue of immigration is something that impacts the school district significantly. And I'm in favor of making sure everybody who's here is here illegally. And those that are having an issue with our system, we need to look at maybe what the system is doing or not doing to change the laws. But right now, the laws are the laws. But the school district is tasked with educating the students. The public school system, I, as a school board member, cannot decide who we let in our doors and who we don't let in our doors. We are required and will be sued otherwise if we don't provide an education to the kids in this district. And so it's challenging. It's not always right. It doesn't make everybody happy, but we have a responsibility. And I do think there's areas where you're exactly right when we talk about lunches and the schools wind up being the parents in some cases. Those are areas we have to look at and find a better way to do that so that the teachers and the schools aren't tasked with these items that take away from the education time. Because again, our first priority is to provide these kids a quality education. And there's a number of ways you can do that. There's a number of paths in how you get there. But it really is, Dan, it's a challenging situation that depending on, what side people are on and what their views on, there's no right answer. But I think again, that my pendulum story, getting that pendulum back to the middle is a good start.
And Common Core?
Common Core has been a struggle from the beginning. In my opinion, it hasn't proven to be the best thing we've ever done. The SBAC test that we impose on the middle school kids it comes from the Common Core. It is not the best test I think we can give these kids, but it's one of the tests we're required to provide them. I think again, we gotta try to get away from a lot of these state and federally mandated standardized tests and really look at what kind of testing can be more individualized for these students. And I don't mean because people are being lazy and they have to have things that cater to them, but I think if we're looking at an individual education, and we call that a learner-centered model, where we're focusing individually on kids and what each individual kid needs to help them succeed, sometimes you got to get away from these standardized tests and look at what's better for the classroom and what's better for the individual student. And I think that's what we're missing right now, but it's what we're really trying hard in our district, to find a balance to somewhat get back to.
Okay, Paul, back to you.
Thanks I truly thought we were kind of blow through in 20 minutes and be done, but it went on for a good long while. And to be honest, I think we all kind of learned a lot tonight about what goes on in the school district and what you guys do, and I'm really happy with it. Tomorrow night, please join us. We're going to have Dave Williams at 6 o'clock, and then Lori Bagwell at 7 o'clock. It will just be the two people, and it will be that way for the rest of the week, just two at a time. I know it's kind of late, but it's kind of, I think it's time well worth it, well spent. And I appreciate everybody showing up tonight, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks
Joe.
for the opportunity.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay, good night. Good night, everybody.
Everyone.